Welcome, everybody. This is the 25th episode of the Native Paranormal Rangers. My name is Laura Massey from Two Feathers Medicine. We have the usual suspects here of the Paranormal Rangers. That's Michelle Miners, Jonathan Dover, and Stan Milford. And we have a very special guest with us tonight, Gary Mlynarski. So Gary is a veteran Coast Guard and he's into everything paranormal, I think, from chatting to him just now. And he also has a podcast called Are They Out There, which tells you exactly what he's into. So Gary, would you like to tell us a little more about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit it on the nose. I am a Coast Guard veteran. I had the opportunity of serving around the country with the Coast Guard. One of the things or places I should say, I served was Iwo Jima, Japan, where the famous flag raising was. And you want to talk about a very paranormal island. That island is full of things happening because of the 30,000 deaths that occurred there. I've worked with law enforcement. I've delved into many things from the paranormal to investigating cryptids, conspiracies, which is always fun to take a look at. But I figure the only way to learn about things is to dive into it with both feet. And that's kind of what I've done with everything. And it brought me to meeting Michelle and from that here to you guys. So I appreciate y'all having me.
Brilliant. Well, it is so good to have you here. We've had the whole of July has been our Sasquatch Bigfoot month. So I guess to continue on that theme, you think, okay, Michelle, we'll talk a bit about Bigfoot, and have you any experiences with Bigfoot, Gary?
I had an experience. I don't know if I want to call it Bigfoot or not, but it was here in Utah actually, and it was 1982. Right before I went to Iwo, we were camping up at a place called the Kazi Campgrounds up by the Boy Scout camp. And that night we heard a bunch of different noises around our tent, and there was three of us, and we got a little nervous, and we crossed over the bridge and turned on the car lights. And we had all these, we had about 4 or 5 sets of red eyes look at us. And we had guns with us, and we shot, and these red eyes didn't even move. So we left the mountain, and we came back the next morning to find our tent shredded up. There were some unusual footprints around it. And when we talked to, I won't mention the agency here, but they deal with wildlife. And they told us that nothing happened and that we were just pretty much crazy and drunk. And we hadn't even had a drink that night. So it was kind of weird to find those things. Our food was spread out all over the place, but the prints we found didn't match any of the animals that were in the area that live up here in the mountains.
What were the prints like?
One of them had a hand. I mean, if you were to hold a human hand up, the thumb would have been about where mine is, but the fingers were like longer, like double, and probably in about that size. And it had paws for its back feet and a hand, and it seemed to be leaning down on the left hand. The prints in the sand on there. And a matter of fact, the girl that was with us that night was going to college, and she wrote a story about it. And she got an A for it, and the teacher told her, well, that was a great story. I don't know how you thought that up. And she explained it was real, and the teacher was like, okay, whatever, type thing. Didn't believe her, but loved the story. But yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, I've heard sounds in the mountains while we've been hunting, screeches, but I mean, without recording them at the time, because I wasn't into it at that time, couldn't tell you what it was that was out there.
And what sort of height were the eyes? Sorry, what sort of height were the eyes? You saw the red eyes.
They ranged between about 4.5 to probably 6 foot, because there's a sign out there that's about 5.5 foot tall, and one set of the eyes was over the sign when you cross the bridge there. On there.
How many sets of eyes, Gary, did you estimate?
It was between 4 and 5 sets of eyes.
Okay.
So, we had a lot of people tell us they were raccoons, but I mean, raccoon prints are only, So I know I'm Polish, but we know the size difference between, you know.
I had an experience one time when I was working security for the nomination before I got into law enforcement. And so I had a team of maybe 4 security officers that were subordinate to me. And one night when we were doing a perimeter check on this fairgrounds that we used to secure, um, we had just gone out of the gate, and the security officer that was driving the patrol unit that we were in shined the spotlight. It had like the police unity spotlight, and this field lit up with eyes of hundreds of red eyes. It was an experience. I jumped out and I went running out into that field to see what this was that was causing it, but I was never able to actually see what it was that was causing the red eyes that we see.
And how does Gary's description of the hands and the prints match up to what you two have come across in your time? Well, and Michelle too.
Well, I think that in some of these cases, we've had, where you've had people reporting basically a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and when you get into that investigation, what I found is that investigation will go into one of two directions, and that would be the classic Bigfoot case, or that for us, for me, witchcraft and the shape shifting type of things. So I think until you actually get into it and see evidence of maybe these things kneeling down or sitting down and that kind of thing, it becomes very interesting in what you're seeing as far as evidence.
One of the things too that I've been running across when we talk about Bigfoot and UFOs is that you either, when you hear of a Bigfoot reporting or something, there's usually an associated UFO sighting with that. So, the belief is that maybe Bigfoot is being transported, teleported, whatever, by UFOs or something like that. Now, obviously, there's no proof to that out there, but there are a lot of reports that coincide with sightings and UFOs on that as well.
Yeah, we saw the same thing happening. We would get they call them flaps, UFO flaps, where there's suddenly a whole bunch of reports of them for some reason, and at the same time, anytime we had a UFO flap, we'd have a corresponding increase in reports of Bigfoot, and vice versa. If there was a lot of reports of Bigfoot, then UFOs were always kind of there on the periphery, involved somehow in that whole thing.
Right.
And we just took note of it over a lot of years of doing this, and just thought it was very unusual.
Right. Hey, and if you don't mind, it looks like Mary Anderson asked me a question about Russell J. Gould. I do not know that question, nor have I heard of Russell J. Gould on that. So I'm sorry, Mary.
Thanks, Gary. I think one of the things we discussed with Andrew about the UFO sightings in line with Bigfoot and so on, I think we were talking about energy lines, ley lines as well, weren't we? The connection with those UFOs, using those at times to re-energize, and also that it coincided with Bigfoot because they could, I think, it was with Andrew, wasn't it? We were discussing this, guys. Michelle's gone again.
I think so.
But we were talking about the possibility of the sightings lining up with many of the ley lines as well across the world. I mean, that's all a possibility, isn't it? It's all in potential, that.
Well, one of the things that me and Stan had started talking about back in 2006 when we were doing all these investigations was the possibility, and understand this is just at this point it's an opinion, but I haven't seen anything that changes my opinion yet. The idea that these Bigfoot and UFOs and even hauntings to some extent are all have something to do with dimensions.
Mm.
And we've seen reports of UFOs that have just literally popped into existence with a loud pop and have been in an area and then suddenly just fade out and disappear. We've had many reports, both in the Pacific Northwest and even uh, in Canada, around the Toronto area, of Bigfoot uh, simply vanishing into thin air,
Hmm.
either when they're moving or when they're sitting still and somebody's watching them. They just slowly fade out. And we've tracked Bigfoot ourselves over miles, and the tracks disappear in trackable ground, which is really disconcerting. You almost feel like they're on a bungee cord, and they just got pulled into the air and taken somewhere else. It's a very odd feeling when you realize that if they had taken another step, they would have left a footprint. So, things like that just, and then we started looking at this idea of hauntings and ghosts, and what if they were the same things, this idea of dimensions. It kind of fits into this whole missing 411 category that David Pilates is talking about. And it could be an explanation that maybe these gates are opening and closing of their own volition, or they're being manipulated somehow. And it's kind of an elegant solution, and at the same time, how do you prove it?
Right. Well, and Jonathan, you bringing up the 411 thing and the possibility of dimensions, portals, that sort of thing. The one story that struck out to me wasn't just the disappearances, but it was the family where the grandfather was at the end of the trail, the end of the line, and he disappeared and ended up something like 12 miles away in another canyon, and they didn't know how he got there. He was found like 12 hours later. He was fine, had no clue. And then I can't remember what the name of the survivalman, what his real name is, but he went out there to see if he could do the trek across a straight line, and he couldn't even do it in 2 days. He was like, it was impossible for him to get through. And that's part of that whole 411 series with that fact in there. So when you talk about portals or anything like that, did that grandfather step into one and it spit him out in another canyon, so to speak? So it's interesting that you brought that up, and that would happen to be part of one of that 411 series.
Hey, Gary, one of the phenomena I experienced um, when I did a haunting investigation that occurred there on the reservation, uh, one of the phenomena I experienced was what is referred to as a port, where an object will appear or move or that kind of thing. But in this particular case, it was coins. And I would have coins repeatedly fall out of thin air in front of us. Uh, sometimes they would come flying across the room and they would hit you. But with that, experiencing that and seeing, with your own eyes, these coins materializing out of nothingness, out of thin air, and in 2 days, a total of 66 coins uh, manifested, and uh, but uh, out of all of that, I know at least 10 times I witnessed the coins materializing, and even to this day, that phenomenon still occurs uh, in my life and around me. But one of the things is this idea of other dimensions. So seeing a coin, a physical coin, appear out of thin air, and repeatedly doing that, it lends to the idea that these coins are manifesting or materializing from some other plane of existence into our physical world. And so I think that particular case for me really cemented that idea of other dimensions, and actually the the idea or possibility that all of these things that people refer to as supernatural or paranormal, that's the connection to that is these other dimensions and the role. So,
Right. And, keeping along kind of with the Bigfoot line, a year ago, we were down in the Four Corners area. I'd never been to Four Corners at all. And I was speaking to one of the ladies there that was selling jewelry. And she had told me that her sister uh, there on the reservation was down by the river doing something. And she had seen Bigfoot come down to the river, and it scared her so bad that she ran off and told people. And when they went back out there, they found some evidence, but then, like you said, the tracks just disappear. Like it was there and then it's not there, type thing. Like it just vanishes in thin air. So they never got any pictures or any other proof of what she had seen. But some other people that were standing around said that they've seen things like that out there in the nation, and that they believe that it walks among them. So, it's kind of hard to tell people they're seeing things, when there's so many reports of the same things from people who don't know people. You know what I mean? So there's no coercion of a story, or I made this up and let's wait for the right guy to come along that's gullible or whatever. You know what I mean? So there's got to be something to it. I just wish that we could get some kind of physical evidence to prove that it's actually happening. So to put it out there.
Well, what we find today is that modern science, the way it's based and the way they look at things, uh, things have to be repeatable. You have to, you know, go back and time it and show that it punches a clock and comes across these barriers. And we don't realize. We've often said that there's a spiritual component to all this, and I'm not talking about religion. I'm just talking
Right.
about what's inside of everybody. And there's this spiritual component that's ignored because it doesn't fit in with science. Yet you have people that have out of body experiences, you have people that have near death experiences, and they can in detail tell you what the EMTs were doing to try to bring you back, and what the doctors were doing, and what the room looked like. And yet we ignore that because science just doesn't have the answers for that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, yeah, and one of the big questions is always from the non-believers and stuff are, where are the bones? Where are the bones of Bigfoot? Find me a body, right? My answer to them is where are the bears? Where are the bear bones? Where are the bear skulls? Right? I mean, Utah's filled with bears, you know. And with all my hunting that I've done, both bow, rifle, muzzle loader, so I've trapped, all the seasons. I've only run across live bears. The only bones I've ever come across is maybe, a carcass of a deer that you can tell was a fresh kill or something like that. But I've never, ever, ever come across like bear or, full bodied elk or anything like that in the wild. So for me, it's like, obviously, if bear bones can disappear that quick, if a Bigfoot passes away, those bones can disappear as quickly as a bear. So that's kind of my theory on it. I don't know what you guys think.
well,
Certainly, go on, Stan.
we are open, to other people's experiences, and like what John said earlier about the spiritual component lacking in modern science. John and I were investigators in law enforcement. And so the techniques and procedures and everything related to that, related to collecting evidence and investigating, when we got into the paranormal, there was nothing there as far as these type of procedures. We had to step outside that, um, communicating with the entities like the Mutual UFO Network or MUFON and Bigelow Aerospace. Uh, Both of these two groups, were well versed in investigation, and John and I had to go out to meet with them to see how it was that they were approaching these investigations, um, and that led to investigating other subject matter like hauntings and things of that nature. So,
Right.
you know, there is obviously a big void when it comes to these type of investigations, and sometimes you just kind of have to feel your way in the dark till you find what works. Adapting and other
Right.
protocol and techniques and stuff. So,
And you mentioned MUFON and that. My father was Air Force, and when he passed away, they started finding like other CD-214s and such like that. And he had a top secret clearance called a TOMAL. And when I first started looking into it, a TOMAL dealt with UFOs and the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. So I actually reached out to Stan Friedman, who's passed away now, asking
Mhm.
him about a TOMAL. And I also called MUFON. MUFON basically told me, we don't want to talk to you about it. Don't call us. And then Stan Friedman got back to me in an email and said that I was barking up the wrong tree, that he couldn't help me. He wasn't going to look into it or anything like that. And he said it in a very nice way. And then now, if you look up a TOMAL, you can't find anything that deals with UFOs. It's all about the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. And I got to tell you, my dad did nothing in that field of work. He always told us he was command post. His DD-214 said he was an air traffic controller, which there was no way. And he always wore a black suit, white shirt, and black tie when he traveled and was overseas. The only time he wore an Air Force uniform was here in the States. When he left to go TDY or anything like that, he was discharged from the service. When he got to the next base, he was re-enlisted. That's why he had so many DD-214s, and he always wore a black suit, white shirt, and black tie.
well, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
They
interesting.
shut you guys out, shut you up really fast. I apologize for the technical difficulty. I'm traveling, and so my internet connection is not reliable. But I wanted to ask you, just listening to what you're saying, is I love the fact that you have an unscripted version of your experiences, and we are the same here. We believe that we need to disclose the things that are within us, our experiences, our ability to tell the audience that these things exist and these experiences exist. So, Gary, do you want to share the show that I was on, your show, about a year ago, and what happened? And it really kind of took you for a surprise.
Yeah, so we invited Michelle on to Are They Out There? And I think it was during the first 30 minutes of trying to record the show, I kept getting interference in my headphones. I kept hearing like a signal, like this, like something was either trying to talk in a different thing or like almost like a Morse code type thing. And it just kept going on and on and on. And then I started to have all kinds of different problems. And I had to stop the recording. We had to start all over again because there was just so much interference going on, and nobody else was really hearing it, but I was hearing it in my headphones. And when Michelle would talk, it would get a little louder with this like ticking that was going on and stuff. So yeah, it was the only time that I've ever experienced when we were trying to record a podcast. that had ever happened when we brought Michelle on.
And I found it
It's pretty
really
amazing.
interesting. Go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say it's pretty amazing how different types of paranormal phenomenon is capable of manipulating electronics, and
Mm-hmm.
whether it's cameras or audio, or in some of the investigations I had, you know, we definitely had a manipulation of the equipment going on, and it's pretty surprising.
Well, what was really interesting, the rest of us had a tech check in ours, wherever we were, worked perfectly. But Gary was the one that was having the issue, and he kept saying, "This is really strange. This is really strange. I've never had this
Yeah,
happen."
yeah, well, I mean, I just couldn't explain it, and I was the host of the podcast, so everybody had logged in, and I would think that they would have had the problems instead of me, but it was just coming through my headphones, like loud and clear, but nobody else was hearing what I was hearing, So I know it wasn't my microphone or anything like that at the time. Um, but and I have to admit, here at the home I live now, we've had quite a few experiences, and I sent a video of one of the things that happened to Michelle. But like my fiance, I kept telling her, right after my mother passed away 2 years ago, my closet light would turn on with no reason, right? And she told me, she's like, "You just leave the light on. You're forgetful. You leave the light on." And I'm like, "Okay." Well, one morning I got up, was in the shower, and I heard her scream. And I'm like, "What's wrong?" And she's like, "The closet light just came on." So now she's a believer. And we've had, like, she's heard footsteps in the house. We've had lights come on, turn off, things like that. But now she's like, "Why do you have to bring that on us?"
I
So,
Well,
listened
Gary,
to your show. I listened to some of that podcast and heard all of that was going on. And I think at one stage you said there might be some telepathic communication going on with you.
Yeah, it that podcast, like I said, that was, I don't know if it's just the energy from Michelle or whatever, but it's only happened having Michelle on. We've never had it happen. We even had a guy on, that he has such a following, and he talks about how he is transcended with this deity that's in his head and talks, and like nothing ever happened there, right? And I would have thought with him things would have went haywire, but no, it was only with Michelle.
strange
So
things happen.
strange things happen with Michelle. Have you had experiences like that, Michelle, other than on Gary's show?
Yeah, I have. I have. I've had it on the film. I've also had it with, you know, a couple of other podcasts, and people don't know how to react to that. They're just like, "What is it about you?" I don't know. Maybe things don't want to be said. Like I had
Mhm.
a lot of technical difficulty coming on this show. As you can see, I was fiddling around, but now I'm getting a clear signal. It's really interesting. Maybe something about Gary and I's interaction does they want us to know it.
Well, and
ET
you know,
related. Who knows?
right, and I mean, even Michelle, you got my text about when I told you what I did out at uh, God, I just went blank. When I was down at the ranch and I was outside the front gate and I was filming a TikTok for
Yes,
the second season, you
yes,
got that message, right?
right.
This is no lie. I filmed 5 to 6 minutes out in front of the ranch, if I can call it that, talking, turning around, showing everything. And when it was done, no audio. It totally cut out my audio for it. And I live like 4 hours away, so I wasn't going to turn around and go back and try to do it again. Uh, but yeah, it was kind of weird. It's the first time I had ever been by the front gate, and yeah, just no sound. Filmed perfectly with absolutely no sound.
It's interesting how manipulation. When I was on the ranch myself, when I would visit from time to time in the early days, I call it, but that was 6.5 years ago, my photography would get blanked out, black screened, everything. I had to learn to do it in a different way. Speaking of technology, you submitted two videos that were
Mhm.
caught on your camera. So for the audience and for the Paranormal Rangers and Laura, we're going to play that real quickly, and he caught something on that. So I'm
Right. And that, so that first
It
one,
doesn't. Didn't want to show. Didn't want to. Did you see that?
it kind of flashed there. I saw a little flash in the corner, but I saw the first one I saw where that one, it slowly moves in, and where it goes into the house is actually my garage. And the second clip is, like I said, a couple minutes later as it comes out of the garage and goes away.
Yeah, it didn't show up that way. I saw it when I was
Yeah. All I
when I had
saw
viewed it.
that I hadn't seen before is a little flash down in the corner. I've never seen that before, but maybe it is you and me,
Oh,
Michelle.
only
I
it's
don't
not
know.
very good. Okay, let me play that again. See what we get. Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw I saw the little thing and it stopped. Something's
Right. And then the
messing with the
second video I sent you will show it coming out.
The thing I
Okay,
liked
let's
with
do.
that is you have the movement of the flag in the background that gives you a reference of movement
Mm-hmm.
with this orb or object, how slow it's and deliberate it's moving. You know,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
obviously not a bug or that kind of thing.
Right. And
That you,
and you can even see as it passes by one of the edges, you can look straight through it before it goes into the wall. And
right.
that's what I found interesting. And then that second clip, it does come out, and so it moves from right to left. So if the wind was blowing one way, it wouldn't have come out and went the opposite direction.
Opposite.
And was I seeing
Living
other
still.
orbs there in the beginning? Were there
I
some
think
other things
those were
flying around?
bugs. Those are
Oh,
Those
bugs.
are
Those
okay.
are
bugs.
bugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So where I live, we have a
Okay,
lot of mosquitoes, moths, things like that
Okay.
flying around.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll show the one coming out of the wall. Let's hope we can
Mhm.
see it and it's not a technical issue here.
It's
Yeah.
I don't understand why
I
that's
didn't
not
see it.
playing. And it's clean. It's
Yeah,
clear as
it's
day
too
when I sent it to you.
yeah. I'll have to redact. I don't know. Could be us.
Yeah. I mean,
He doesn't
you
want.
saw it when I sent it to you. Am I correct, Michelle?
Yes, I've seen them. I've seen them both,
Yeah.
and all I did was download it.
Interesting.
Interesting.
It is, isn't it? But it's in
Yeah.
line
Doesn't
with
want.
what you were saying.
Right.
Things
It,
go missing or get lost or get removed, however.
right. And I know we've kind of gone into that paranormal realm, but I spent a lot of time in the paranormal realm, and one of the um, things that started making me believe that there's more to what's here is a place called the Capitol Theater in Salt Lake, um, where I've been there many, many times, but I started catching stuff on tape. And some other things happened to us while we were there. And one of the things is a friend of mine that I met that got me into the Capitol Theater. He caught a voice one night, which was one of our first investigations on tape that we could have not have put on a digital tape recorder, but it was a woman's voice telling us to get out of her house, you know? And it was like, how did that happen? And it was clear as day, but it was kind of slow and wispy, but she was like, get out of my house, like that. And we were like, and the ghost has a name there. They call him George. And a young man had died, I think it was back in the 1920s, with a fire that happened at the Capitol Theater. But there is so much that goes on at that theater that's when it started making me more of a believer. Because, like I said at first, I was like, for me, a ghost comes out and scares you, and then I'll believe in it. But until I see one, I don't believe in it. But when we started catching that and things happening, the Capitol Theater kind of got me to turn that 180 into more looking at the unnatural things, still explaining things that could be explained, but the voices and things like that. You're going to laugh at this. I use cat toys for triggers. I have these little clear cat toys, if you know what I'm talking about. And if they move, they'll light up. And I was at a friend's house, and I put 4 of them across a counter, made sure there was no air movement, no vents, no air conditioning. And I had a spirit box going, and he was trying to see if he could get a friend that had passed away, a very good friend of his, Sid, to answer. And he asked a question, and right in the middle of it, one of the balls just started lighting up. I didn't freak out, but most everybody in the room started freaking out. So
those are good investigative tools. I've used them myself. When you're talking about electronic voice phenomenon or recordings, in one of the investigations I did, we had captured a voice of a woman, and she says, "Guess what?" with this Scottish accent. When John and I traveled to Scotland and I played that audio for some of the people over there, they actually knew where that dialect was from. So it's pretty amazing,
Right.
But how this woman's voice got on to this building on the Navajo Nation, that part I don't know, unless maybe she was serving as a nurse or something like that back in the 50s or sometime like that.
It can happen with people with baby monitors. Have you ever seen any of those? So people have their baby monitors in the house, and some people have a camera as well, don't they? And some they haven't been intentionally looking at capturing anything, and they think they've been a bit shocked by some of the sounds they hear and voices and things they've seen actually in the room.
Right. Well, we had the Associated Press. A girl got assigned to do a Halloween story with us, and we took her to the Capitol Theater, and she was not pleased at all. She was like, I don't want to be here. I brought my husband. I could care less about this. She's like, but I've got to do the story. She goes, I don't believe in anything you're going to show me. She goes, because I know this is all a setup. So in the Capitol Theater, there's 3 floors. You have the ballets on the top floor. Down below, you have it's set up like a rectangle where the orchestra has their own rooms, the actors and such like that, right? And so there's a Salt Lake County deputy back in those days that would be inside all night long to make sure nobody was breaking in or anything like that. So we went to get in the elevator, and the elevator was going up and down, up and down, up and down. And she goes, real funny, you've got the sheriff's deputy in there that's not stopping at our floor. And he comes walking out of a side door, and he looks at the elevator, and he goes, George is up to his old annex. He goes walking by. So all through the night, little things were happening. We had, and this was kind of the funniest thing that happened. When you walk into the Capitol Theater, the women's restrooms are on the left, men's are on the right. Well, the toilets started flushing on the men's room. And she was like, I can't believe you would even do that. So we walked into the men's room. Nobody's in there. We walk out. The women start flushing. We walk in. Nobody's there. Then we come out in the center, and all of a sudden it was like this symphony of toilets flushing back and forth. And then they stopped. And so later that night, after everything had happened, she still thought we set this all up. We're sitting on the stage. I was running the recorder. She ends it. I rewound it a little bit. And in a break, a voice, I can't remember the exact words, but it was like scared lady or something, get out. She heard that and looked at me and says, how did you plant that? I was like, how do you plant that on a digital recorder to know when there's going to be an open space to put that in? And then I think she realized it because she looked at her husband and she's like, we're leaving right now. She turned to me and she goes, you'll get your story. Don't ever call me again. I'm never coming back here. And they hauled out of there. And we got the story a couple weeks. Well, not a couple weeks, about emailed to us. And but yeah, that was she. I think she became a full-on believer that night.
That's great. What a great story. I have a video, and I have never shown it, but I will at some point. It is a baby monitor with a baby camera, and it is glowing around the baby's bassinet, and then you can hear a man's voice in the background. He's whispering something to the baby. And it's almost unnerving because you think it would have been a woman's voice, coddling her child. No, it was a man's voice. He's talking to the infant. That was really interesting.
And Mary's just put in the chat that she sees lights are flashing around her and there's no bugs in there. So sometimes, in my experience, sometimes they're orbs, because I've seen orbs as well indoors. What's your take on that, guys?
Well, I think anytime, today you have all sorts of audio and video recording equipment, just like the Ring cameras and things like that, security cameras, and people have cell phones. And I think that at times, you have these different phenomena, especially like spiritual activity, spirit activity, that is doing its thing, that it does day in, day out, throughout the week and throughout the month. And it's there. It's just now we have all of these cameras everywhere that is there that can actually capture some of these things when it's doing what it usually does. I mean, you have drone footage and just like what you had mentioned earlier, Gary, about Iwo Jima, and the amount of fatalities that occurred in that location, and just like other places like Gettysburg, and that's known for different types of spirit activity phenomenon. And so yeah, it's pretty interesting what we see today. Yes, we have all of these different social media formats, be it YouTube or TikTok or whatever it is. People are able to readily share video clips and footage and audio in real time around the globe. So I think that's one of the key things that's happening in our time while we're here now, is this awakening kind of that's going on, because people are able to share this stuff. And in the past, different governments would try to suppress and control all of that information. And today they can't really do that because you've got the internet there, where people are capable of sharing the information to each other around the globe. And it's just too much to try to control, suppress.
Right. And on Evo, when we were out there, we didn't have any of the equipment you have today. I mean, we didn't have cell phones. While I was on the island, we actually didn't have TV, radio, anything like that. We had a ham radio that we kept in contact with, like Dakota Air Force Base, which would fly C-130s once a week out with our food and stuff. So when you were in the caves, probably one of the eeriest things when you're in these caves, because like you could crawl in on your belly and back and be, army crawling through a cave, and then it would open up into this huge room that we called them spiders, that had all these tunnels going every which way. But if you turned your flashlights off, it was darker than dark. And as you were walking around in there, you always, every one of us always had the feeling that somebody was watching us. Somebody was behind us or in front. We just knew somebody was there. But when you look, nobody was there. and you would hear weird things in these caves. And on the island, I mean, there were rats, and they were big rats on the island. And we had a few dogs, but that was it. There was no other animals besides these little bees that would sting the hell out of you, that could make these type of noises or um, breathing. I mean, a lot of the times it was almost like somebody breathing heavy that you could hear in these caves, but yeah, it was probably one of the weirdest experiences. And then we had a lot that happened in our around our electronics. It seemed like up by the ET room is where a lot of the stuff would happen on the base. And we had one room in our barracks. So the barracks were like a straight line, and they were all on the same circuit. But we had one guy's room that his lights would totally go out, like he would lose all electricity in there. But we're all on the same circuit, so if he lost it, we should all lose it. But his one
Mhm.
room all the time would lose it and come back. So just weird things like that on the island. I wish I had the equipment now. Back then,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Gary, do you believe that the phenomena also knows when you're handling technology that it will or won't appear? I mean, have you had those situations? I have, being
um,
on the
I,
rants.
I, you know, I think, I guess the best way to put it is, I think if the phenomenon wants to be known, it'll
Hmm.
it'll it'll let it be known, and it will interact with you if it wants to. So I would say yes, but it doesn't happen all the time. Um, I mean, I've gone to a place a couple times where I know a lot of things happen, and I'll go, and then absolutely nothing happens. And that's when everybody goes, "Oh, you made it up." It's like, no, it just sometimes it doesn't happen. I mean,
Right.
you see all these shows out there, like, well, I don't want to get sued over them, but there's a lot of ghost shows out there, right? And there
Hmm.
was a guy who did an interview that was part of one of these teams, where he actually admitted that they told him to go back inside and act like something happened for the production crew, so they could have a show. And it was like he was being honest. Nothing happened. He goes, sometimes that's what happens. And I wish they would portray that in some of these things, to let people know that every investigation doesn't have something happen. Sometimes
Hmm.
you can spend hours and it's a dud. You get cold, wet, and you go home.
Yeah.
But it's sad that it has to come down to sometimes make believe on these type of things.
Well, one of the
Well,
things that we found out in our work is that if you show fear, that it'll help whatever it is manifest even more. And it's just really strange. We've actually had producers ask us, can you look like you're scared? And we said that's not us. We don't do that. We don't show fear. And we told them flat out, if you went on an investigation with us, it'd probably look really boring because we're not going to react to things. We're not going to go running out of the room going, ah.
Right.
Um, and you see that. But along with that, we are taught to be scared. You tell ghost stories around the campfire. You tell about murders. You talk about all these things. This is campfire fodder. And so we look at TV. What do you see? You see the chainsaw massacre. You see these all these blood and gore type of things, that this is going to happen to you if weird things start happening. Um, and along with that, we've seen in the past, the 50s were a great example. The B science fiction movies where you saw invasions of aliens, that were here to conquer the human race, and so we need to fear them. And it just goes on and on. Even today's news is dedicated to scaring you, to manipulate how you think in terms of politics, so you will vote the way they manipulate you to vote. And, so it hasn't changed much. Uh, but if you're doing actual scientific investigation with a spiritual component, you're not giving away to fear, you're observing and you're recording your observations. And, yeah, it doesn't look like much, but you're gonna be in a position not to let your fear run away with you, and you're gonna be in a position where you're not gonna give it more energy to manifest itself.
And I think also
One
the
thing,
global narrative, if it's keeping you in that fear mode with all the fear porn they put out, then it's one stops people investigating, but also stops people believing or
one of the
following.
things you hear quite often today is the term disclosure, you know. And for myself, Michelle and John, we're not hanging on that word. We're not sitting around waiting for the government to give us this disclosure that they're supposedly holding over our heads. You know, these different phenomena, we've experienced these things during our investigations and even personal experiences at times, and we know that they exist. We don't need some government agency or entity, giving us the official word that UFOs exist or extraterrestrial or that kind of thing. In our lifetimes, we've had experiences of our own and investigated cases where the evidence shows that there is these phenomena in reality.
And one
And
other thing, one
and
other thing that probably needs to be mentioned here:
okay.
we interpret things based on our how we were brought up and what we've learned. And so, if you have a strict religious background in whatever church, you're going to see things like this, and immediately you're going to say, this is demon activity.
Mhm, mhm.
You know, we don't know, according to scripture, uh, angels were beautiful, Satan was beautiful. The demons that he had, the fallen angels were beautiful angels. And, so you have good angels and bad angels, essentially. And, how do you tell the difference? How do you know which one is which? Um, but we interpret that stuff. If you were of a different religion from a different land, you might see something completely different and interpret it as such. And there's an old saying that says, "Can you look at a situation without naming it? Naming it, making it a word, causes fear." So you can't name it. You can't go into that and say, "Oh, this is demon activity." Otherwise, you're going to be very hesitant about the investigation. And so you have to kind of stifle those impulses and just accept it for what it is, something unusual that you're going to investigate and document.
Right. Right. And for me, I'm not a super religious guy. But when you talk religion and you start talking investigations and stuff, um, the word faith is in there. That all religions are based on faith. And here in Utah we have a predominant faith or religion. And for me, I say all the religions cannot be right and they all can't be wrong. It's what you believe in, and so I always put religion out of it. I like to learn about things. Like I've told Michelle, I would love to learn more about the Native American, the spiritual side of things. You know what I mean? To understand that part, because I mean, the big things are the Catholics, the Mormons, you have Episcopalians, and everybody says their God is the true God. Well, if God is God, God is God for everybody, right? So it's just faith. in that. So if you can keep that out of the investigations, like you said, Jonathan, I mean, I think you get a more pure investigation instead of bringing that any type of religion or anything like that in, where you have the demons, the angels, good, bad, that sort of thing.
You know, the most intriguing stories about paranormal visitations, we're talking about ghosts, you know, or voices that come over electronic such. What about the ones that come in human form? There's a story that was told on the ranch I had a project with, that in the 20s a visitor had come and he was wearing farmer overalls, and had had a dinner with the family, and they asked him to stay overnight because they were drawn to his energy. And he says, "No, I've got other things I've got to do." And so he walked the 2 miles of this ranch down the road, and the children followed along with him. And he turned around at some point, and he had a hole in his overalls, and a bright blue light came shining out, and he disappeared. And so the kids told the parents what had happened to the visitor. So those are the most intriguing stories for me when it comes to that paranormal interaction with the human form. Those
See,
could
I
be
Well,
messengers. Yeah.
go ahead, Stan.
I was just going to say, you hear that in a lot of different respects of the paranormal, where, let's say, what you're just
Hmm.
now talking about with the hauntings, where a spirit can actually take a physical, like, human body form that's like we have, you know, and at times that same spirit manifestation can vanish out of thin air. Sometimes spirits are translucent. You can see through them. Even with the Bigfoot, same kind of thing. There's times when people will witness this thing that people call a Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and it is in a what appears to be a solid physical form, just like the table that's sitting in their kitchen or whatever, and it can vanish out of into thin air, and but the same with a lot of different things. Even with the witchcraft related stuff, things can be in
Hmm.
physical form and then vanish. So it's very interesting.
I mean, that could go back to the theories of the portals,
Yep.
the different dimensions, interdimension,
Right.
type things as well on that. I mean, if you go back into the 40s and look at the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk there in New York, and I forget what the third place is. It's like this big triangle between three places where all these quote experiments were happening, and the men that were aboard that destroyer that was part of the Philadelphia experiment say, some of them, not all of them, have said that when that happened, they were in a different place and then back. So, I mean, I believe that, like you said, Michelle, that story of that person in the overalls, maybe that was somebody who either came forward in time or back through time, or maybe just had a message to deliver and then went, that light was his portal on that. And
Yeah.
again, it's all faith. It's what you believe in on that. But I mean, there's all kinds of possible explanations that are
Hmm.
out there. It just can't be nothing, because, like Stan said, we're talking about the Bigfoot that just disappear. You hear stories of people that they have nothing to lose by telling you these stories and nothing to gain. I mean, it just happened to them. So I believe there's something to that. I would love to have proof someday of it, but I do believe in I think the interdimensional type of things that are out there.
So, in the same way, Gary, that we were saying that, say, Bigfoot possibly comes from another dimension, and I know the Rangers have discussed this as well. So there's a portal or something there for them to come through, or they simply step through the dimension. I don't know. It would work the other way round, presumably. So people could appear in, could come out of our dimension and go somewhere else, because this might account for people who disappear for a while and they think they've been gone a long time. And them, to them, you hear stories, don't you? To them, it feels like days and days, and they come back and like 1 second has gone.
Right, right. I have heard those type of stories
Yeah.
from people. I think that's kind of like deja vu as well. You know, I mean, you sit there and you're in a conversation like, I know what's going to happen next. I've been here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Type,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, that's kind of hard to explain to my book, how you know what's going to happen next when it's happening at that moment, type thing.
And also
Well,
to support that idea of dimensions, about 15 years ago, the Large Hadron Collider was doing an experiment where they hoped to open a dimensional gate and send a message through. And so, you're talking about $1 billion worth of equipment to try to open a dimensional gate, you know.
Right.
So these are these brainiacs, these scientists with the huge heads, that are coming up with this stuff, and they acknowledge that there could be other dimensions and time. I don't think time has the same meaning. Time is relative, and you talk to people that do remote viewing, and they'll tell you that they can go forward and backward in time. So, as Doctor Who would put it, it's all this wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff. That it's a mystery that nobody's unraveled yet. We think of dimensions as these solid barriers right next to each other, like a line. What if they're like a cloud that's interlaced, um, and you can slip through at any point when the process is just right,
Right.
and, and come back through. And we're of the opinion that Native Americans in the past were able to manipulate these things and go into different lands or different dimensions and see people and bring back descriptions of them.
Right. And when you look at the scientific end of this, look at black holes. Some think black holes are a path to a different dimension, basically, or a different point in time that you slip through, which would work the same way, I guess, as a dimensional portal or whatever. And until we put a spacecraft that can relate back all that information, you know what I mean? We'll probably never know. But I mean, that's the theory behind a black hole. So why couldn't there be, quote, black holes here around us that become those dimensional portals? I guess is where I'm going with this.
Yeah,
And if I sound like I'm rambling, tell me to shut up.
I just know don't get caught in the event horizon,
Right.
because time is going to go a lot faster, and you're going to come back. This idea of time dilation, that you come back from space, and 100 years have passed, and to you it's only been several months.
Well, and and I'm not going to put anything 100% on a movie, but I think uh, Matthew McConaughey did a movie, something about that with time and space,
Yeah,
uh, with his daughters and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And I think that's all was based on something like what we're talking about with the portals and the dimensional shifts and stuff like that can make that possible.
Interstellar.
Well,
Interstellar. Right.
it was
Yeah.
Interstellar, yeah. It was interesting. I did a parent-child NASA camp with my son, and one of the astronauts, young, I'm going to call them a young astronauts because they're younger than me, um, said that they did a geriatric test when one of our former Utah senators went back into space. Do you remember that? to the ISS space station. And they don't ever put this out to the public, but 10 years were lost on their lives. Space will age, not the other way around. So that information came to us when we were doing that space camp down in NASA in
Interesting.
Huntsville. Yeah, and I was the theory of relativity doesn't work. And the brilliant Einstein, not maybe everything is correct mathematically as we think,
Right.
but maybe that's why vortexes and portals are so important to scientists right now, to find out if that age issue is an issue.
Well, they said Einstein came up with the unified field theory, and this was what was used to try to make that ship disappear, the USS Eldridge. Uh, and shortly after that experiment, when it apparently failed because we never got any information on it,
Right.
Einstein withdrew that theory as incomplete, and
Yep.
and never worked on it again.
Well, it's
Interesting.
interesting how important gravity is here to us as the human race. Now it makes sense, The gravitational pull has something to do with how our bodies react to Earth. And maybe
Right.
that's why we're earthbound and not interstellar bound yet.
Well, that'll change because what is it? Every year the moon moves 2 inches further away from us.
Right.
So
That's true.
And
That's
and
true.
gravity isn't the same on every point in Earth. It
Right.
can vary.
so true.
Well,
Well,
it's top of the
I've really
hour.
enjoyed
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed having you, Gary. And
Well, thank you.
I would like to suggest that we do a part 2 if you're up for it at some point. So
Oh,
maybe
absolutely.
Michelle could.
Yeah,
I
Absolutely.
really enjoyed it.
because we got questions and our audience has questions.
Yes,
Yeah,
and also
definitely.
we could get Andrew on because he's pretty good on the
Yeah.
quantum mechanics side of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Love
He
it,
really-
definitely.
Andrew.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd
And-
love to start answering questions and do like a session of answering questions from everybody that's making comments there on the side.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, come
We'll
on
have
again.
a-
And we'll do that.
We'll have a show called Super Chat. Yeah,
Stay
we'll be doing
tuned to
that.
this Bat channel.
The Bat Channel. Yeah.
Well, thank
We're
you for
gonna have
having
the
me. I
super
thoroughly
chat.
enjoyed it.
It's been great having you,
Cool.
Gary. Thank you.
We enjoyed you.
Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
was fun. Thanks.
Thanks,
So, if
Ranger.
anybody wants to get hold of you, Gary, do you have an email? Or
I do. It's are they out there? Then the number 1 at gmail.com.
super, thank you.
You
The
bet.
Paranormal Rangers can be found on Facebook and paranormalrangers.com. Is that right, Michelle? Cool.
Yeah. Cool.
Lovely. Thank you. And thanks everybody for coming on. Really enjoyed it tonight.
Thank
And
you, audience.
Thank
we'll
you.
be back next week.